Morning. When Joe came to me a few weeks ago and asked me if I would consider doing the message this morning, I initially resisted. I told him I was teaching a class, my life was full, I really didn't think I had time. But we went to prayer, the two of us. He told me the Lord had already said I was supposed to do it. But I went to prayer, and the Lord not only gave me a confirmation, but He gave me the title and the passage to use, and so I thought, oh, okay, I can do this. And what I didn't know is that the week when Joe was getting ready to go fishing, that we were going to end up in a totally unplanned but wonderful blessing of a kitchen remodel. And that Joe was going to be gone fishing while I was having to make every decision with every person who was coming to help us. And beyond that, I had to do all the grunt labor work that had to be done, because we're doing it ourselves. And I honestly, if I'm really honest, I totally forgot I had to do a message today. I think I just pushed it to the back of my mind. But then Wednesday morning, as I was sitting in prayer with the Lord, it was like a big lightning bolt of, oh yes, I have to prepare a message. And I was telling the Lord, this was really bad timing. And then I looked down at my notes of the message that He'd given me, and there it is, the lost art of presence, learning to live like Jesus in a chaotic world. And I could just see this smile on the Lord's face. And He said, this is what I planned all along. So I share that with you because I really feel this particular message I'm sharing more than most from a place of weakness, from a place of struggle. And this week was just there to reveal to me how much I need to grow in this area. So we'll just go on this little journey together and have this conversation. And so we're going to start by really just asking the question, what is presence, or what do I mean by that? Now, there's a lot of different ways you could talk about it, but I did what every good researcher does. I just went right to the internet and I looked up presence, and I found this definition on vocabulary.com. It said, presence is the state of being somewhere. When you get an invitation that reads, your presence is requested, you are being asked to show up. And so if I were going to define presence as simply as I could, I would say presence is showing up for your life. Presence is showing up for your life. And I think in this day and time, this is harder than it's ever been. And I want to talk for a minute about why that's so. I want to kind of lay the stage for why we're talking about this, why I feel like God's called me to share on this. We live in a culture that seems to be obsessed with activity. And we sort of have this myth that we are valued by how much we can cram into any given day. And we let the world know how much we're cramming in through our posting on social media. We live out our lives in this public way. And technology, in addition, has, as you've heard me say before, and I'll say it again and again, technology is now rewiring our brains. And so we're sort of addicted to the constant stimulation of our devices, whether it's our smartphones, whether it's our computers or our tablets. And so that is robbing us constantly of our capacity to be present, to show up for our lives. And this is very serious. As I was praying even this morning, Lord, what is at stake? I realized that really what's at stake is the two things that Jesus said were our very top priority in life, which were that we love the Lord our God with all our heart and soul and mind and strength, and that we love our neighbor as ourselves. If we're not showing up to our lives, if we're not being present to the people who are around us and the situations we encounter, we're not loving God and we're not loving our neighbor. And so that's kind of the foundation of what's at stake and why we need to talk about it. So, this is the iconic picture of not showing up to our lives. We're all at the family table and we're on our devices. What does presence look like? Now, in a minute, we're going to actually see what it looks like by looking at Jesus. But when you think of somebody who really is there, somebody who shows up, somebody who's present for you, What are some single words that come to mind? Just call them out. Focused. Connection. Attention. Communication. Responsive. Listening. Yeah. Awake. Faithful. Yeah. Undistracted. Yeah. Those are so many good qualities, and we could come up with a lot more. So you can turn to Luke 8, because we're going to look at Jesus, and we're going to see how he lived his life being present to people. And we'll start with verse 41. Luke 8, verse 41. And there came a man named Jairus, who was a ruler of the synagogue. And falling at Jesus' feet, he implored him to come to his house, for he had an only daughter, about 12 years of age, and she was dying. As Jesus went, the people pressed around him, and there was a woman who had a discharge of blood for 12 years, and though she had spent all her living on physicians, she could not be healed by anyone. She came up behind him and touched the fringe of his garment, and immediately her discharge of blood ceased. And Jesus said, "Who was it that touched me?" When all denied it, Peter said, "Master, the crowds surround you and are pressing in on you." But Jesus said, "Someone touched me, for I perceive that power has gone out from me." And when the woman saw that she was not hidden, she came trembling. And falling down before him, she declared in the presence of all the people why she had touched him and how she had been immediately healed. And he said to her, "Daughter, your faith has made you well. Go in peace." While he was still speaking, someone from the ruler's house came and said, "Your daughter is dead. Do not trouble the teacher anymore." But Jesus, on hearing this, answered him, "Do not fear, only believe, and she will be well." And when he came to the house, he allowed no one to enter with him except Peter and John and James and the father and mother of the child. And all were weeping and mourning for her. But he said, "Do not weep, for she is not dead, but sleeping." And they laughed at him, knowing that she was dead. But taking her by the hand, he called, saying, "Child, arise." And her spirit returned, and she got up at once, and he directed that something should be given her to eat. And her parents were amazed, but he charged them to tell no one what had happened. So if we look at this story and ask the question, what does presence look like? I think the first thing that we see is that Jesus listened for his Father's voice. Now, this isn't directly observable in the story. You have to kind of get into the nuance of it to see this. But basically what had happened was Jesus come back to his hometown. He was surrounded by people. Everybody was excited to see him. And you had to know there were tons of needs all around. Different people asking for this, asking for that. And Jesus is making a decision of where to go and what to do. How did he know? How did he know he should go with Jairus? He was listening for his Father's voice. The word tells us that he says, "I only do what the Father tells me to do." So we know that he was listening for his Father's voice. Also, later on in the story, when they come along, they say, "Don't bother the teacher anymore because your daughter's died." He knows she hasn't died. How did he know that? He was listening for his Father's voice. So the first thing that presence looks like is that we listen for the Father's voice. And I want to just say that to be present to others means first to be present to God. We're only going to be present to others to the extent that we understand how to really listen for God's voice. Because without him, we're just pretty self-absorbed, right? So the second thing is Jesus listened for his Father's voice, and Jesus embraced the moment at hand. Jesus embraced the moment at hand. Now picture this. Jesus has come back to his hometown. It'd be kind of like a media feeding frenzy. If you can imagine all the media there with the big star that's come back, and they've heard all these amazing stories, and they've all got their microphones shoved in his face, asking him questions. And I could almost imagine that if it were today, people would have their smartphones and be begging for selfies, and it would just be this crazy chaos. It says they were pressing in on him, and that word really means they were almost choking him with their presence. And this is what it was like. And in the midst of this craziness, Jesus stops, and he says, "Who touched me?" Now, the disciples, and this story's in 3 of the Gospels, and the disciples, honestly, I think thought he was a little bit crazy in that moment. They looked at each other, I think, and they looked at him, and they waited to see what was going on, and nobody volunteered anything. So Peter, in this version, says to him, there's all these people around you. How could you ask who's? They're all touching you. They're all wanting a piece of you. And Jesus says, no, somebody touched me. Jesus stopped and embraced the moment at hand, even though he was on his way to a little girl who was dying. He had the time and he had the focus to stop and take that time with her. Jesus could be interrupted. That's one of the hardest things for me with presence. I don't like to be interrupted when I'm on a mission, right? He could be spontaneous. He could change his mind and stop and do something in this moment that didn't have anything to do with what the next moment was. That's what presence looked like for Jesus. And I was thinking about this one morning. The great thing about doing a message is you get to live it out and see, every day. So I was in my quiet time. I think it was Friday morning. It's all a blur. But I was thinking about this, and I was remembering the night before, one of the men who's so kindly volunteering to help us, and I won't give his name, but I was asking him to look at this old cabinet that I had and to give me his opinion on it and on where it might go. And he said, in this light I can't really see that cabinet. And I just said, well, come over here in this light, you can see it. And he said, because I've got some eye problems, I'm starting to lose my vision in a certain way. And so I said, well, come over here and look at it. And the next morning, the Lord just kind of gently said to me, I always, in my quiet time, I ask 2 questions. Lord, where did I see you yesterday, and where did I miss you? And the Lord said, you missed me there, because what would presence have looked like? Presence, you would have said, oh, that's no fun, that's awful. When did that happen? What must that be like? I would have connected in the moment at hand, but I didn't. And that's why I say I'm going to be sharing more failures than successes. But Jesus connected in the moment at hand, even though multitudes were pressing around him. Now this is where this is so practical for us, because we all have multitudes pressing around us in a different way. Whether you're a mom or a dad with little children pulling at your legs, and whether you're have a job where they're wanting you to stay for 18 hours a day. I mean, we have the multitudes pressing in. But even worse than that, we have, through our devices, the world now has 24/7 access to us, right? And so the multitudes are pressing in through beeps and pings and little red numbers and ringtones, and we hear it all the time. And what Jesus would demonstrate for us, that it's in those moments when those things are coming at us that we can actually ignore it all and be in the moment with the needs right there in that moment. There is a myth of multitasking, just so you'll know. The science says that you can maybe keep 3 to 4 things. They keep lowering the number. They used to say 7, now they're saying 3 to 4 in your conscious brain. But you don't think of them all at once. Your brain moves back and forth, right? So you think about when you're with your spouse and you're trying to talk and their eyes glaze off over here, and you say, you're not listening to me. And they say, yes, I am. I'm not talking about my spouse, of course. And he says, yes, I am. I can repeat everything you just said. Well, yeah, because that part of his brain was keeping contact, but he wasn't present, right? And we all do that to each other. We think we can read our text message and listen to our spouse. We think we can watch a TV show, a sports show on TV, and talk to our 3-year-old who wants our attention. But I'm just telling you that's a myth. You will only be able to pay attention to one thing at a time. And Jesus knew how to do that. He demonstrated that for us. He embraced the moment at hand. And then finally, Jesus was sensitive to the real needs of the people that he encountered. And I love this part of the story because this woman was healed. Jesus could have easily gone on, couldn't he? She had her healing. Why couldn't he just go on and get to what was next? But he didn't. He stopped. And if you read the story in Mark, it shows how he let her tell her story in front of all these people. Jesus knew she had deeper needs than just the physical healing. He knew that she needed to be able to tell her story of what it had been like for 12 years. She was rejected because she was ceremonially unclean. That's how she was considered. So people couldn't even touch her. The implication had to be that it was her fault she was sick. And so this is what she had dealt with. Jesus knew she needed to be able to tell that story, and she needed to be healed from her shame of it. And so he stopped and took the time to let her do it, to let her tell it. To me, this is one of the most important things we need to learn about presence, is we need to be able to hear each other's stories. Whether it's just something that happened to our kid on the playground at school, or something that happened to our spouse at work, or something that happened to our friend when she was at a store, or whatever it is, people have stories. We have big stories too. And we need to be able to listen to them, and it takes presence to do that. Have you ever started to tell something really important to someone and seen their eyes glaze off, seen them grab their phone because they heard a little beep? How does that feel? Presence requires being sensitive to the needs of the people that we are with. And Jesus gave her the time for that. I also saw how sensitive he was later in the little girl who he healed. I think it was so sensitive that he sent everybody away. He knew these poor parents had been through the mill. He wanted them to have that precious moment of her healing in private. He was sensitive. And then finally, what did he do after he healed the girl? What did he tell him to do? Give her food. That's such sensitivity. You know, if it had been me, I would have been on my way. Did my miracle, I'm going. But he was sensitive to the needs at hand. So that's just a little glimpse of what Jesus shows us about what presence looks like. So I want to now just end our time by talking about, well, then how can we learn presence? Because it is something that we learn. And I have just 3 things I want to say here. And the first is that presence is a spiritual discipline. What I mean by that is it doesn't come naturally. Okay? It doesn't come second nature. And that means it's going to require intentionality, and it's going to require practice. If you think about how practiced you are with your smartphone, because you constantly go to it, you've had so much practice. Now, I know some of you don't use smartphones, but you are the small minority now. So you just be patient while I'm talking to everybody else, okay? The way we have practiced going to our smartphones or our devices has really trained us in this. It takes practice. Well, in the same way, presence is a spiritual discipline. And I define it this way. Disciplines begin with a decision, and they're sustained through determination and dependent on God's grace. What that means is you never establish the disciplines that really help you thrive in your spiritual life just on the fly. Okay? It just doesn't happen. You have to establish a discipline, and presence is a spiritual discipline. The second thing is that presence requires a healthy selflessness. I'm not talking about a woe is me, I'm nothing, I've got to just keep my head down. I'm talking about having your head up and being able to forget yourself so you can be present to the person you're with. And this takes a healthiness of your soul, right? It takes a lot of work. For example, and around here we really work on this stuff. This is what our Living Free class is about. This is what our Jesus ministry, a big part of it is. So I have a stronghold of control. And if I don't deal with that, that means that I can't be present to people because it's too important to me that I get things done the way I want them done when I want them done. And I can't even think about the people in my life. We have to deal with our stuff that makes us so self-absorbed. And we're all self-absorbed. And one of the things, part about this is that our culture has this lie that it's telling us Literally thousands of times a day, you get messages through TV, through your devices that tell you that what matters is what people think about you. And you know what the underlying lie about that is? That they think about you at all. I'm going to set you free here. This is one of the nice things about getting older. You begin to realize this. People don't think about you. Why? They're thinking about themselves. We're all thinking about ourselves. We walk in a room, we wonder, do I have the right thing on? What are they going to think about me? So I don't have time to think about someone else. Presence, from Jesus' perspective, is to be able to have a forgetfulness and to deal with that so that you can be present to people and not thinking about what do they think about me, but how can I just be there for them in this moment. And I think one of the things that I feel like Christians need to work on so much is this self-awareness. Self-awareness says, I understand that I have this tendency to talk about myself the whole time. And we can look back and say, boy, Lord, I never really heard anything that person said because I was so focused on what I wanted to get across. And we really need to work on that. It's a healthy selflessness. And then finally, presence is fostered through times of absence. Presence is fostered through times of absence. And what I mean by this, first of all, obviously, it means solitude. And how many of you really get any solitude in a week's time? And I know for parents of young children, this is very hard. So I'm not telling you what the rhythm should look like. I'm not telling you when it should be or how you should do it. But I'm telling you to thrive in this culture and to be able to be present to the people in your life, you're going to need some solitude during the week. Because that's how we recalibrate our hearts towards God's purposes. And we need it. I need it every day. Because every day I look at the day before and there's always moments. I can't think of a single day when God didn't say, yeah, you missed me here, here, and here. And we need those times of solitude. This discipline of presence and the discipline of absence. So absence is pulling ourselves away. It's what the Bible calls a Sabbath. It's pulling ourselves away. Sometimes it's being alone. Sometimes it's not necessarily being alone with God, but it's pulling away from all of the inputs in our life. Maybe it's pulling away from social media. Maybe it's pulling away from texting. Maybe it's pulling away from TV. And because I've found that my generation tends to kind of look down on the younger generation for their smartphones and stuff, but we have the TV on 24/7. That's technology, folks. So maybe we need to pull away from some of these things. And this is kind of a graphic of what it is. If I had a whiteboard, I would be doing this, but I'll just explain this to you. So we have the discipline of absence is what enables us to love the Lord our God with all our heart and our soul and our mind and our strength. It's where we engage with God in prayer and His words, where we listen for Him. It's where we pray. Intercession is praying for others. It's where we receive the strength and the love and the care we need so that we can then experience the discipline of presence, which enables us to love our neighbor as ourselves, to listen to them, to all those words you guys said at the beginning, to attend to them, to be, conscious, to give, to serve, and to love. And these things work in tandem. Presence and absence work together and enable us to do this. Now, I want to just end with this. I think I have, okay, there's our points. Whenever we hear a message like this, and we get these, like these are your 3 to-do points maybe, right? And I know that for me, those kinds of things always land as a list of to-dos. And I heard an illustration by John Piper years ago that so has helped me with this. And what he said was, we tend to think of these things that God calls us to do, we tend to think of them as, that's our job description, and God's the boss. So we need to go do the right thing and be good employees. And really, that's not the case at all. If we want to think about it this way, it's better. God is the great physician. And this is His prescription for our joy. And I'll give you an illustration of another failure and what God spoke to me about this. So a few weeks ago, Joe and I were home at the Sunday afternoon, and I was working on my class on my computer, and the doorbell rang, and Joe went to the door, and I could hear him talking. It was a young man who was selling some kind of ant control or something, and Joe was talking to him, and then I heard Joe say, "Now, who's this pretty girl behind you?" And he said, "Well, that's my wife." And they got in a conversation, and the guy said, "Well, could we have a drink of water?" And Joe said, "Well, sure, come in." So I got up out of my chair and came out, and we went and found some bottles of water and brought them to him, talked to them for, a few minutes. And then they went on their way. And again, the next morning, in my time of absence, when I'm sitting with the Lord, I asked him, "Where did I miss you? Where did I see you?" And he brought that up. And I realized that they were hungry for some fellowship, I think, with an older couple. They were drawn to us somehow. And we were nice to them, but I wasn't present in the moment. Because if I had, I think we would have had them come in, sit down, and given them some watermelon and talked, And as I was telling the Lord, I said, "Lord, I just feel like I fail at this all the time. I feel like I'm such a disappointment to you." And the Lord just spoke to me in his gentle way. He said, "This is for your joy. I'm not disappointed in you. I'm disappointed for you." And that sort of changed my perspective, because now I know that being present to other people is my joy. And it glorifies God, absolutely. But anything that glorifies him will increase our joy. That's the way he made it. That's the way he intends for it to be. So this morning, as we think about this, I want you to think about God as the great physician. And think about your own life and where you're at with this issue of presence. Think about the people in your life. How present are you to them? How present do they feel you are to them? And what might be God's prescription for you? I've given some thought. Those are my thoughts that I felt like the Lord laid on my heart, but he might have something totally different for you. And so we're just going to have a few minutes of reflection. You can just close your eyes, because I want you to just pray. I want you to just think about presence. Think about the past week. Maybe the past 24 hours. That might be easier. And sort of get it in your mind, where am I at with this discipline? This way of living like Jesus. Where am I at? How am I doing? Sort of get that in your mind, and then I want you just to ask God, you're the great physician. You have a prescription for me. What is it? I want to jot it down. Spiritual disciplines begin with a decision. They're sustained by determination. And they're dependent on the grace of God. What decision might you make today? Maybe a little one. I'm just going to pray for you. Lord, I just pray for your presence to just speak to us as we go from here, that we might be able to live like Jesus did, that we might be able to be present in the moment, we might be able to really be attentive to the people that we love, and to the people you bring into our life, Lord. And we ask you for great grace in your name.